At this time, Lisa Young will take a roll call to see if a quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, when I call your name, please respond. Nancy Allen.
Present.
Thank you. Stan Ballone. Dave Barry. Benjamin Bitter. Walter Bouchard. Kim Butler.
Here.
Thank you. Derek Castaneda.
Present.
Thank you. Aaron Chavez. Beverly Chanowski.
Present.
Thank you. Sam Brown.
Present.
Thank you. Michael Denby.
Michael Denby is here.
Thank you. Scott DeBias. Robert Forrest.
Here.
Thank you. Elizabeth Foster.
Present.
Thank you. Christina Hopes. Rhonda Humbles. Carmelita Nichols. Michelle Kamikawa. Michelle, thank you. Spencer Camps. Martin Lucero.
Present.
Thank you. Corin Hooper. Kelly McKenzie.
Present.
Thank you. Amanda McGinnis. JC Porter. Marshall Pimentel.
Present.
Thank you. Mario Saldamando.
Present.
Mario Saldamando.
Sorry, can you hear me? Present.
Yes, thank you. John Sherrill.
Present.
Thank you. Ramona Simpson.
Present.
Thank you. Susie Stevens. Edward Stillings. Steve Trussell. Kai Umeda.
Present.
Thank you. Robert Vandenacker.
Present.
Thank you. Kristen Watt.
Present.
Thank you. Michelle Wilson. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Quorum is now present. All members are participating virtually. Please remember to mute when you are not speaking. If you are attending by phone only, then press *6 to unmute. We operate our committee meetings in full transparency, giving the public access to committee meetings, materials, and discussion. The public cannot view the chat comments. As a result, we are disabling the chat feature in all committee meetings moving forward. If you need technical assistance during a meeting, please contact the helpline at 602-452-5095. Again, that phone number is 602-452-5095, or contact MAG staff. We appreciate your understanding in helping to maintain transparent discussions for the benefit of the public. Moving on to agenda item number 2, call to the audience. An opportunity will be provided to members of the public to provide input through written comment to the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee on items that are not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of MAG, or on items on the agenda for discussion but not for action. Members of the public are asked to submit written comments related to this meeting through the MAG website at azmag.gov/comment and indicate for which meeting the comment is intended. Comments may be sent at any time leading up to the meeting, but must be received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. Comments received prior to the deadline will be read aloud during the meeting. Comments must not exceed 3 minutes in length. A total of 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee requests an exception to this limit. Please note that comments received for agenda items posted for action will be read at the time the item is heard. MAG staff, have we received any public comments? If so, please read them at this time.
Madam Chair, we did not receive any public comments.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So we're moving on to agenda item number 3, which is approval of the April 22nd, 2021 meeting minutes. There has been 2 edits that were brought to our attention. The first one is on page 7, the first paragraph under agenda item number 5. The words Pinal County will be inserted in front of Air Quality Control District. And the second minor edit is on page 11, the second paragraph. There is a typo, and it will be corrected as the acronym for Maricopa County Air Quality Department, MCAQD. So with that, if I could have a motion to approve the April 22nd, 2021 meeting minutes with those edits. And when you make your motion, if you could please say your name for the record, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hi, this is Ramona Simpson, Town of Queen Creek, and I motion to approve the April 22nd, 2021 meeting minutes.
Can I get a second?
This is Scott Tobias with Pinal County Air Quality. I second that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion from Ramona Simpson and a second from Scott Tobias. Is there any discussion? Not hearing any comments. We will go to a roll call vote. Will be taken at this time by Lisa Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, when I call your name, please state your vote. Nancy Allen.
Yes.
Thank you. Stan Balone.
Aye.
Thank you. Dave Barry. Benjamin Bitter. Walter Bouchard. Kim Butler.
Aye.
Thank you. Derek Castaneda.
Aye.
Thank you. Aaron Chavez. Beverly Chanowski.
Aye.
Thank you. Sam Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. Michael Denby.
I approve.
Thank you. Scott Tobias.
Aye.
Thank you. Robert Forrest.
Aye.
Thank you. Elizabeth Foster.
Aye.
Thank you. Christina Hopez. Rhonda Humble. Carmelita Nichols. Michelle Kamikawa. Michelle Kamikawa.
Aye.
Thank you. Spencer Camps. Martin Lucero.
Aye.
Thank you. Corin Hooper. Kelly McKenzie.
Aye.
Thank you. Amanda McGinnis. J.C. Porter. Marshall Pimentel.
Aye.
Thank you. Mario Saldamando.
Approved.
Thank you. Megan Sheldon.
Aye.
Thank you. John Sherrill.
Aye.
Thank you. Ramona Simpson.
Aye.
Thank you. Susie Stevens. Steve Trussell. Kai Umeda.
Aye.
Thank you. Robert Vandenacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Kristen Watt.
Aye.
Thank you. Michelle Wilson. Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, we will move on to agenda item 4, EPA finding of failure to submit a state implementation plan to meet the 1987 24-hour PM10 standard, moderate area requirements, West Pinal County, Arizona. The presentation will be provided by Lindy Bauer, Maricopa Association of Governments.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, members of the committee. On July 23rd, 2021, the Environmental Protection Agency published a final rulemaking that made a finding that Arizona has not submitted a required revision to the state implementation plan for the West Pinal County non-attainment area that addresses the requirements for a moderate PM10 non-attainment area. Also, some related rules and other analyses that would need to be submitted to meet the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Now, under the Clean Air Act, Arizona was required to submit a moderate area plan, and the state did so on December 21st, 2015. Now, as you will recall, on January 8th, 2021, EPA published a partial approval and a partial disapproval. This is proposed for that 2015 West Pinal moderate PM10 non-attainment area plan prepared by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. Now, on May 17th, 2021, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality withdrew the moderate area plan submission. Now, the finding of failure to submit final rule is effective August 23rd, 2021. The finding establishes a 24-month deadline after the effective date for EPA to come in and promulgate a federal implementation plan to address the moderate area requirements, unless prior to the deadline, Arizona submits and EPA approves the state's moderate area PM10 non-attainment area plan as meeting all the requirements under the Clean Air Act. So this deadline would be, the 24-month deadline would be August 23rd of 2023. Further, the Clean Air Act also provides for the imposition of offset sanctions 18 months from the effective date or by February 23rd, 2023, if a complete plan has not been submitted by that time. And there is also the 24-month sanctions for highway sanctions that would be effective August 23rd, 2023, unless we submit a complete plan to EPA by the effective date. So we wanted to call this to your attention because the sanctions clocks are ticking, as well as the 24-month federal implementation plan clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lindy. Are there any questions?
Hi, yes, this is Martin Lucero with the City of Surprise. How does that sanction affect the larger regional area of MAG
As far
and
as
our air quality standing?
As far as the sanctions are concerned, the sanctions usually are go to the non-attainment area. So the West Pinal PM10 non-attainment area. But, you know, as you're well aware, there are a lot of projects that go from the MAG region that go into the West Pinal County PM10 non-attainment area. So this would definitely not be good, and we certainly would never want to have that happen.
So that would also affect our conformance model for the Maricopa side of the PM10?
Regarding conformity, with conformity, we do our conformity analysis when we do it for Maricopa up here. It also includes, it uncovers our entire transportation planning boundary, which goes into Pinal County. So yes, you know, we would be affected. We certainly would not want ever to have the sanctions imposed. Also, although not stated specifically in this Federal Register notice, but under the Clean Air Act, if the highway sanctions ever are imposed, on that day, conformity lapses on the Transportation Improvement Program and the Regional Transportation Plan. So it would impact both the Sun Corridor TIP and Regional Transportation Plan, and also the one that we have up here for Maricopa.
Are there any other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Ramona Simpson, if I may.
Please.
So, Lindy, this of course affects Queen Creek, since we're both in Maricopa and the West Pinal non-attainment area. What was their biggest issue, the EPA, why they did that partial non-conformity, and what can we do as municipalities to assist in the process of submitting a modified plan?
Regarding what were EPA's biggest concerns when they proposed partial approval, disapproval, they only proposed partial approval on a portion of the PM10 emissions inventory. That was it. And everything else, they proposed disapproval. Largely, this is probably due to the fact that at the monitors, down in Pinal County, the region was not clean as of the attainment date, December 31st, 2018. So basically, EPA proposed disapproving just about everything in the plan. Now, EPA also noted in that Federal Register notice that if a serious area plan is submitted that meets the serious area requirements and the moderate area requirements, then this could be something that would be approvable by EPA and solve the moderate area problems as well.
So is that going to be kind of the plan of action, you think, from the MAG and Pinal Maricopa kind of perspective, is to look at beefing up some of those emission controls in that area, and possibly more paved, unpaved roads issues, right?
As far as MAG is concerned, the serious area plan under the Clean Air Act has more stringent requirements than a moderate area does. So that's why EPA was saying that if you meet the serious area requirements, they will most likely meet the moderate area requirements as well. And DEQ withdrew the plan. Another big reason was if EPA had gone final and they published that language in their proposed partial approval and disapproval, if they had gone final, this region would face, and also the down there in Pinal County, there would be immediately a conformity freeze. And this is something that would be highly detrimental to both Maricopa and Pinal.
Great, thank you, Lindy. And so I think we have some work cut out for us, just like we did the first time with Maricopa region. So we're here to help and support as members and try to also help make this happen as well, because I think it's a state issue and not just a West Pinal County issue.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 5. Thank you, Lindy. So agenda item number 5, it's an update on the 2022 Serious Area Particulate Plan for the West Pinal County Non-Attainment Area. Presentation by Matt Poppin with Maricopa Association of Governments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm going to spend some time today getting the committee updated on everything that we have done so far in relation to preparing this plan, the Serious Area Particulate Plan for the West Pinal County Non-Attainment Area. So some of this information will be reviewed, but I want to get the committee up to speed with everything that has been done so far. So we can all be on the same page moving forward. All right, next slide, please. So again, just as background, May 31st, 2012 is when EPA originally designated the West Pinal non-attainment area as a moderate PM10 non-attainment area. That was effective July 2nd, 2012. In response to that designation, the Arizona Department of Quality prepared the 2015 West Pinal Moderate Area SIP and submitted it to EPA on December 21st, 2015. The attainment date for the moderate area was December 31st, 2018. On June 24th, 2020, EPA published a final rule stating that the non-attainment area failed to meet that attainment date of December 31st, 2018, and that rule was effective July 24th, 2020. Because the area did not attain, the area was bumped up from a moderate area to a serious area. Also within that notice, due date was set by EPA that a serious area plan is due 18 months from the reclassification date, which is January 24th, 2022. Next slide. Some additional regulatory actions that occurred. On January 8th, 2021, EPA published a proposed rule to approve in part and disapprove in part the 2015 West Pinal Plan that the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality had submitted. And then again, on February 26th, 2021, EPA published a limited approval and limited disapproval of a revision to the state implementation plan regarding agricultural best management practices rules designed to address the moderate non-attainment area requirements. In response to these, ABQ withdrew that 2015 West Pinal Moderate Area Plan on May 17th, 2021. Next slide. On July 23rd, 2021, EPA then published a finding of failure to submit a state implementation plan to meet the moderate area requirements for the West Pinal County PM10 non-attainment area, and that is effective August 23rd, 2021. With this final failure to submit notice, the imposition of emission offset sanctions will apply beginning February 23rd, 2023, if the state does not submit a complete moderate area plan. 2 years after the effective date, August 23rd, 2023, imposition of highway sanctions will apply if the state does not submit a complete moderate area plan to meet the requirements of moderate area requirements for the non-attainment area. And then lastly, again, within 2 years of the effective date, EPA could promulgate a FIP if EPA does not approve the state's moderate area plan submission. So to avoid these things from occurring, EPA has also indicated that a submission of a complete serious area PM10 plan that addresses all of the moderate area requirements will turn off the sanction clocks for the emission offset sanctions and the highway sanctions. And then if EPA approves a complete serious area PM10, that addresses all moderate area requirements. That will stop the promulgation of a federal implementation plan for the non-attainment area. Next slide, please. So again, going through some of the regulatory requirements of the serious area now, we've talked extensively about best available control measures, which is a serious area requirement. EPA defines, so best available control measures must be in place on all significant sources of PM10 or PM10 precursor emissions if PM10 precursor emissions are determined to be significant as well. EPA defines significant sources as those contributing more than 5 micrograms to a violation of the 24-hour PM10 standard. Best available control measures, or BACM, are defined as the maximum degree of emissions reductions from a particulate source, while also considering the technical and economic feasibility of those control measures. And BACM are required to be implemented no later than 4 years after the reclassification effective date, which is July 24th, 2024. Next slide, please. Additionally, because of the multiple exceedances that have occurred at the PM10 exceedances that have occurred at the Hidden Valley Monitor in 2022, the West Pinal non-attainment area is not able to demonstrate attainment by the attainment date for a serious area, which is December 31st, 2022. Because of that, the area has to seek an extension of the serious area attainment date. Now, the Clean Air Act does allow for EPA to extend the serious area attainment date for up to 5 years if the following requirements are met. You have to show that attainment by December 31st, 2022 is impracticable. Compliance must be met with all requirements and commitments that are in the serious area plan. The plan must include the most stringent measures that are included in the plan of any state or are achieved in practice in any state, and that can be feasibly implemented in the area. And then again, the maximum date allowed is 5 years, which would be an extension of no later than December 31st, 2027. Next slide, please. So in response, MAG contracted with Trinity Consultants to perform analyses of best available control measures and most stringent measures for the West Pinal County Serious PM10 non-attainment area. Candidate measures for best available controls and most stringent measures for all significant sources of PM10 were identified by comparing the existing measures that exist in West Pinal County to measures that exist in other serious PM10 non-attainment areas and PM10 maintenance areas that were formerly classified as serious as identified by EPA's Green Book. So there were 10 areas that the Trinity Consultants looked at to look for these best available control measures and most stringent measures, including several areas in California, Clark County, Nevada, and an area in Washington as well. Next slide, please. Trinity Consultants completed their analysis of best available control measures and most stringent measures on March 31st, 2021, and produced a final report entitled Analyses of Best Available Control Measures and Most Stringent Measures for the West Pinal County Serious PM10 Non-Attainment Area. This final report contained 70 measures that were candidates to be considered as BACM and MSM. And these 70 measures in the report were also evaluated to determine the PM10 emission reductions that were associated with the measures, and also the technological and economical feasibility issues associated with implementing each of the 70 measures. Next slide, please. The next step in the process was to take those the 70 candidate BACM and MSM measures that were identified in the final report, and they were included in a draft suggested list of measures to reduce PM10 in the non-attainment area for consideration by the implementing entities. And then each implementing entity determines which measures are available and feasible for implementation by that entity out of the list of the draft suggested list of measures. So for the West Pinal County non-attainment area, there are two implementing entities. There's the Pinal County Air Quality Control District, and then there's the Governor's Agricultural Best Management Practices Committee. And specifically regarding the list of measures that apply to agricultural sources, the Governor's Ag BMP Committee would be requested to evaluate those implementation of potential measures to reduce PM10 emissions from agriculture in particular. This committee was established by law in 1998 to develop an agricultural general permit that would address the need for controls on agricultural operations. Next slide, please. That draft suggested list of measures went through the MAG committee process, and the first step was the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee recommended approval of the draft suggested list of measures on April 22nd, 2021. Then the MAG Management Committee recommended approval of the draft suggested list of measures on May 12th, 2021. And then the MAG Regional Council approved the draft suggested list of measures on May 26, 2021. Next slide, please. So after MAG Regional Council approval of the draft suggested list of measures, on June 1st, 2021, a model resolution package was prepared by MAG and sent to the implementing entities to assist in submitting their commitments to implement measures for the 2022 Serious Area Particulate Plan for PM10 for the West Pinal County non-attainment area. In response to that, on July 28, 2021, the Governor's Agricultural Best Management Practices Committee passed a resolution committing to implement best available control measures and most stringent measures to address the agricultural sources of PM10 in the West Pinal County non-attainment area. And then on August 4th, 2021, the Pinal County Board of Supervisors also passed a resolution committing to implement BACM and MSM to address the non-agricultural sources of PM10 in the West Pinal County non-attainment area. Next slide, please. So I want to spend some time now and go through the commitments that have been received by both the Ag BMP Committee and then also Pinal County Air Quality, or the Pinal County Board of Supervisors. So the Governor's Ag BMP Committee committed to implement measures 31 through 47 and measures 50 and 51 from the suggested list of measures approved by the MAG Regional Council. In regards to measures 48 and 49, they included PM10 control requirements for the storage, handling, and transporting of off-field bulk materials on cropland. And generally, off-field bulk materials are inorganic materials like stone and dirt. The Ag BMP Committee determined that crop producers in Pinal County do not haul, transport, or store off-field bulk materials. And so these measures were therefore not included in the commitments and were determined to not contribute to expeditious attainment of the PM10 standard in the West Pinal County non-attainment area. Next slide, please. So I want to go through each of the measures that the Ag BMP Committee did commit to implement. So measures 31 through 37 in the suggested list apply to dairies, and they committed to each of those measures. In review, we have reviewed these earlier, but I want to go through them again with the committee so they have an idea of what has been committed to. So measure 31 was a commitment to lower the threshold for when dairy regulations would apply, and so that's lowered now to 50. Measures 32 through 37 include requirements to increase the number of fugitive dust BMPs from 1 to 2 for each of the following categories. So now the requirement will be to implement 2 BMPs for the arenas, corrals, and pens at dairies, 2 BMPs for the waste for handling waste and transport of waste, 2 BMPs for the unpaved access connections, 2 BMPs for unpaved roads and feed lanes, and 2 BMPs for unpaved equipment traffic areas. Next slide, please. Additionally, the Ag BMP committed to implement measures number 38 through 44, which apply to concentrated animal feeding operations for cattle, feedlots as they're commonly called. Again, measure number 38 is lowering the threshold for when these regulations apply to feedlots with 50 animals or more. And similar to dairies, measures 39 through 44 include the requirement to increase the number of BMPs from 1 to 2 for each of the same categories that were mentioned for dairies. So you can see the categories listed there for measures 40 through 44, the same ones that we saw for dairies. Next slide, please. Measures number 45 through 47 and 50 through 51 that were committed to by the Ag BMP committee apply to cropland, growing of crops. So measure number 45 was to increase the number of BMPs from 2 to 3 for cropland areas. Measure number 46 was to include requirements to strengthen the use of BMPs on non-cropland areas. So this would be your vehicle storage and traffic areas. Measure number 47 was to specifically increase requirements to increase the number of BMPs from 1 to 2 for commercial farm roads. Measure number 50 was to increase the number of BMPs for any agricultural earth moving operations that may occur. And lastly, measure number 51 was to include requirements to require the use of BMP to control windblown dust from crop operations on all days, not just high-risk windblown dust days. Next slide, please. In addition to listing all of those measures that were committed to in the resolution, the Ag BMP committee also adopted amendments to the Ag BMP rules to include the committed control measures. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality will prepare a notice of exempt final rulemaking for these amendments and submit it to the Secretary of State for publication in the Arizona Administrative Register. ADAQ anticipates that the final published version of the rule amendments will be available for inclusion in the final non-attainment area serious area set for the West Pinal County non-attainment area. Next slide, please. All right, these are the commitments received from the Pinal County Board of Supervisors. So because there were a number of suggested measures that applied to specific sources, the Pinal County Board of Supervisors grouped the suggested measures into their 5 Pinal County measures. So Pinal County measure number 1 includes suggested measures that relate to construction fugitive dust sources. And they include measures number 1 through 10, suggested measures 12 through 14, number 16, and 18 through 25. Pinal County measure number 2 is for fugitive dust sources from open areas or vacant lots, and they include the measures from the suggested lists, number 26 through number 28 and number 30. Pinal County measure number 3 is regarding unpaved roads, fugitive dust from unpaved roads, and that includes the suggested measures number 52 through 56. Pinal County measure number 4 is for unpaved parking lots and other lots, and that includes suggested measures number 58 and 59. And then their 5th measure is for paved roads, and that includes suggested measures number 61 through 67, 69, and 70. I would like to say just in total, if you take the total of the commitments from the Ag BMP committee and from the Pinal County Board of Supervisors, 61 of the 70 measures have been committed to. Next slide, please. The Pinal County Board of Supervisors did determine that 7 measures from the suggested list were not feasible for implementation. These were suggested measures number 11, 15, 17, 29, 57, 60, and 68. I'll briefly go through the justification and reasoning that was provided for why these measures were either not feasible or not necessary. Measure number 11 was sandblasting and abrasive blasting BMP requirements specifically at construction site. This was determined to rarely occur at construction site and was deemed a de minimis activity. Additionally, the measure was determined to not be economically feasible at a cost per ton of over $17 million per ton of PM10 reduced. Measures number 15 and 17 would be crushing and screening stone operations at construction sites specifically again. And these measures were determined to be duplicative, unnecessary, and also economically infeasible. Normally, these operations were determined to already be required to obtain an operating permit from ADEQ, or these emissions from these activities were already subject to committed controls, other committed controls in Pinal County Measure 1. So they were mainly considered to be duplicative. Next slide, please. Measure number 29, had to deal with mitigation plans for open areas and vacant lots over 10,000 acres. This was determined to not apply in the non-attainment area as there are no areas that meet that 10,000 acre threshold. Measure number 57 was to require explicit dust mitigation controls for off-road competitions on unpaved roads. These would be like a dune bug rally or something like that. This also was determined not to apply in the non-attainment area as there are no of these off-road competitions that occur. Measure number 60 was to prohibit unpaved lots and storage areas on hydrographic lands. Again, this measure was determined to be duplicative of existing measures, measures number 58 and 59 specifically, which are being committed to. And so this measure is considered unnecessary and duplicative. And then lastly, measure number 68 was to require the use of a specific type of wetted brush and blowers on street sweepers used on paved roads and parking lots, and to only use vacuum type cleaning equipment in pavement crack sealing applications. This was also determined to be duplicative of other existing regulations, specifically the opacity regulation, and therefore unnecessary. Next slide, please. So again, I want to go through briefly all of the measures that are being committed to and that are included in the Pinal County measures. So again, Pinal County Measure 1 has to do with construction fugitive dust sources. So measure, the numbers here refer to the suggested list measures. So measure number 1 that are would be required dust suppression control before and after the creation of disturbed services. Measures number 2 and 3 would be to enhance and include additional test methods for the stabilization of disturbed areas. Number 4 is to strengthen visible dust / opacity standards. Number 5 is to tighten bulk material transport dust control requirements. Number 6 is to strengthen and expand track out dust control requirements. Measures number 7 through 10 and number 12 through 19 refer to specific best management practices for the following categories: disturbed soil, unpaved routes, parking areas, the use of watering and dust palliatives, demolition processes, weed abatement, backfilling, clearing and grubbing, foundation and slab, cleaning, cut and fill activity, trenching, and paving subgrade operations. So those would be additional specific BMPs for those categories of construction activities. Next slide, please. Measure number 20, again, this is for construction sources, is to strengthen dust control plan requirements. Number 21 is to strengthen dust control record keeping requirements. Number 22 is to strengthen dust control coordinator, on-site coordinator requirements. Number 23 is to strengthen and expand dust control monitoring and violation requirements. Number 24 is to strengthen project and trenching signage requirements. And lastly, measure number 25 is to adopt dust control training requirements for project coordinators and foremen. Next slide, please. Pinal County measure number 2 was for open areas and vacant lots, and there were 4 of the MAG suggested list of measures that were included in this measure. Number 26 is to strengthen the size threshold for when these requirements would require, down to 0.1 acres. Number 27 is to strengthen existing vacant lot vehicle use requirements. And number 28 is to strengthen existing fugitive dust controls on those lots. And number 30 specifically applies to weed abatement and trash removal on open areas and vacant lots. Next slide, please. Pinal County measure number 3 dealt with unpaved roads, and the measures from the suggested list that are included in the Pinal County measure 3 include to expand the definition of unpaved roads to include alleys, increase the average daily traffic thresholds for unpaved road controls. Number 54 is visible emissions and stabilization requirements for unpaved roads, addresses those. Measure number 55 is to increase the stringency of unpaved road paving and dust stabilization controls specifically. And lastly, measure number 56 is to expand existing reporting and record keeping requirements for unpaved roads. Next slide. Canal County measure number 4 has to deal with unpaved lots, and these are mainly unpaved parking lots. Number 58 is to require a 0% opacity requirement at the property line to unpaved lot requirements. And number 59 is more stringent dust controls for those unpaved lots. Next slide, please. The last Pinal County measure is measure number 5, and this has to do with paved roads, fugitive deaths from paved roads. Measure number 61 that is included within measure number 5 is to strengthen stabilization requirements for unpaved shoulders that exist by paved roads. Number 62 is requirements related to the paving and stabilization of shoulders and medians on new and modified paved roads. Measure number 63 requires the immediate cleanup of track out from publicly accessible areas on paved roads. Measure number 64 requires the use of only PM10 certified street sweepers to clean up track out on paved roads. Measure number 65 is specific for track out controls from very large operations and during windy conditions. Measures number 66 and number 67 require the use of PM10 certified street sweepers on arterials and freeways in the region, in the non-attainment area. Measure number 69 is strengthening of existing paved road and shoulder standards. And measure number 70 is to strengthen record keeping and reporting requirements. Next slide, please. So with the commitments to implement these measures, Pinal County provided the following implementation schedule. So the plan is between January 2022 and March 2023, draft rule revisions, proposals, and stakeholder workshops will be held to incorporate all of these commitments into the rules that Pinal County Air Quality Control District will ultimately propose and then go final with. It is anticipated that by April 2023, an oral proceeding will be held on those rule revision proposals. June of 2023, the Pinal County Board of Supervisors would consider those rule revisions proposals and then and make those final. Sometime between June 2023 and January 2024 is anticipated that there will be hiring of an additional compliance inspector to ensure compliance with these measures by the Pinal County Air Quality Control District. And then in 2024, the Pinal County Air Quality Control District will perform a rule effectiveness study of these new rules that incorporate these measures to see how effective these new measures are. Next slide, please. So now that we have all of these commitments received from the Ag B&P Committee and the Pinal County Air Board of Supervisors, these commitments are being evaluated for two things. Their impact of these commitments towards the emission reductions associated with these commitments and their impact towards meeting and attaining the PM10 standard. And also, what is the impact of the PM10 emission reductions from these commitments to meeting reasonable further progress and associated milestones? So to help with this, MAG has contracted with Trinity Consultants to evaluate and model the impacts of these commitments for the required attainment demonstration and the demonstration of reasonable further progress. And that work is currently ongoing and is currently continuing. Next slide, please. So now that we're through commitments, I want to shift over to some of the modeling work and where we are with that. But as a reminder, I want to remind everyone that the base year that everything is based off of is 2017, and this was based on EPA recommending selecting a base year between 2016 and 2018 for the plan. Currently, the base year inventory includes only direct emissions of PM10. This is because MAG has prepared and shared with the committee earlier a weighted evidence analysis that PM10 precursor pollutants, so these would be ammonia, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, do not significantly contribute to exceedances of the PM10 standard in the non-attainment area, and therefore they're not included in the base year inventory. So the base year inventory is only PM10 emissions. And this base year inventory has been developed with inputs provided by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, Pinal County Air Quality Control District, and MAG. Next slide, please. Here is the pie chart summarizing the base year annual inventory. So this is a tons per year pie chart. These are annual emissions of PM10 within the non-attainment area. Starting from the top, that green slice is tilling and harvesting. And then as you move clockwise, the next categories would be feedlots and dairies. Paved road is in the dark gray. And then the larger categories of unpaved road dust, specifically broken out by type. You have unpaved road dust from public roads. Next category is unpaved road dust from private roads. Unpaved road dust from agricultural roads, unpaved road dust from trails, and then unpaved road dust from the 2 vehicle test tracks that are within the non-attainment area. The next categories on the pie chart include unpaved parking, on-road mobile emissions. These are tailpipe emissions from vehicles on road. Non-road mobile emissions. These are tailpipe emissions from construction, agricultural equipment, those industrial equipment. Fugitive dust emissions from construction is in the orange slice. Permitted sources is the purple slice. And then the final categories are open burning, fuel combustion, and commercial cooking. There's a miscellaneous processes category, which is very small. And then at 9% of the inventory is windblown dust. To the right of the pie chart is a table that breaks out the categories within windblown dust. So the categories of land uses that create windblown dust are summarized to the right. So we have land uses that include commercial, industrial, and public land uses. Those are about 44 tons per year. We have windblown dust from construction, windblown dust from cropland. So this is all of the agricultural fields. Windblown dust from dairy and feedlots. Windblown dust from native desert areas. Windblown dust from what we're calling large open area employment. These include things like landfills, any sand and gravel mining pits, any activities like that are grouped in the large open area. Single family low density housing. This is mainly the rural areas where a home will be situated on half an acre or more, and most of the property is either desert area or natural area. And then there's lastly, the 2 last categories are unpaved roads and then vacant areas. So vacant areas are different from desert in that vacant areas are likely to be developed. These include vacant lots, and they've had some, it's no longer, while there's no use on it currently, it does not resemble desert in the sense that the land has been removed in most vegetation. So this is the current base year inventory that we are working off of. Next slide, please. So one of the things in order to model attainment of the PM10 standard, design days have to be selected in order to demonstrate that the PM10 standard can be met within the non-attainment area. Some of this is review from prior presentations. Again, design days are specific PM10 exceedance days that are representative of the conditions that currently cause exceedances to occur within the non-attainment area. And the design day PM10 concentrations, once selected, have to be reduced to the level of the PM10 standard through modeling of the benefits of the commitments that have been received from the Ag BMP Committee and the Pinal County Board of Supervisors in order to demonstrate attainment of the PM10 standard. Next slide, please. There are 8 monitors, PM10 monitors, that are located within the non-attainment area. Exceedances that occur at each of these monitors need to be evaluated to see if they should be selected as design day candidates. We are looking at the period of 2016 through 2018 as potential design days, as this is the period that was used to reclassify the non-attainment area from a moderate area to a serious area. PM10 exceedances in 2019 and 2020 have also been evaluated to look at trends and patterns to see how the monitor continuing to attain, or is the monitor continuing to not attain the PM10 standard. And then again, design days in 2017 have been prioritized in order to be consistent with the base year annual inventory shown earlier. Next slide, please. Some of the modeling requirements that are associated with these design days. What has been found is that PM10 exceedances occur under 3 main meteorological conditions in the non-attainment area. There's low wind conditions. These are when wind speeds are less than 12 miles per hour. So these no wind-blown dust emissions occur on these days. It's all source activity. There are elevated wind days when the wind speeds are 12 miles per hour or greater, but less than 25 miles per hour. PM10 emissions are caused primarily by wind-blown dust. And then we have high wind dust events when wind speeds are 25 miles or greater. These days would normally fall into the exceptional event category. They are considered uncontrollable and would not be selected as a design day. PM10 exceedances can also occur under a combination where you have low wind conditions during some hours of the day and elevated wind conditions during other hours of the day. In order to categorize these combination days, we are including those as an elevated wind day. So design days for both low and elevated wind conditions are required in order to demonstrate to EPA that the commitments that are included in the plan will demonstrate attainment under all of these types of conditions, except for the high wind dust events. Next slide, please. We will not select design days for PM10 monitors that are not violating the standard. Again, if there is high wind dust event exceedances will not be considered in determining whether a monitor is violating the PM10 standard or not. And so for those monitors where design days are not specifically selected to be modeled, EPA guidance recommends that the evaluation of these monitors be addressed by describing the emissions inventories at each of these monitors and how they are either expected to increase or decrease and whether that would affect future attainment status. So specific modeling of non-violating monitors is not required. And then there is kind of older EPA general guidance that does recommend that the design days at each monitor consider the 4th highest concentration when evaluating 3 years of monitor data. That helps to demonstrate that the committed controls will be sufficient to limit the number of future exceedances to below the PM10 standard. Basically, you don't want to choose a design day where the concentration is too low because perhaps the controls aren't great enough to control all exceedances if you only demonstrate modeled attainment for a design day with lower concentrations. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to go briefly over the 8 monitors and which ones have been selected for design days. Next slide. This is the Casa Grande monitor. In yellow, you will see in the table are the number of exceedances for 3 categories: low winds, elevated winds, and high winds for the period of 2016 through 2018. There was only 1 low wind exceedance at the Casa Grande Monitor in 2016 through 2018, no elevated wind exceedance days, and 11 high wind gust events. So this monitor appears to be meeting the PM10 standard and will not be selected to have design days done for. I do want to mention that we have shown these slides in the past to the committee. The table has been slightly updated from prior slides because we did get some feedback from EPA on which days should be considered elevated winds versus high wind gust events. So these are the latest slides based on feedback we received from EPA. Next slide, please. This is the Combs School Monitor. Again, for the 2016 through 2018 period, there was only 1 elevated wind exceedance. You would need 4, either a combination of low wind and elevated winds to be violating the standard at a 3-year period. So this monitor is also considered to be attaining the standard. The monitor appears to continue to attain if you look at 2018 through 2020 data as well. So no design day will be chosen for Combs School. Next slide. The Coolidge Monitor only has 2 high wind gust events, so no design days will be selected for this monitor. Next slide, please. The Eloy Monitor only has 1 low wind event in the 2016 through 2018 period. Does have several high wind gust events, and looking at the continuing trend in 2018 through 2020, there are no low wind or elevated wind exceedances. So this monitor will not be chosen to have a design day for. Next slide. The Maricopa Monitor, located in the city of Maricopa, there were 2 elevated wind events that occurred in the 2016 through 2018 period. So that's still less than the 4 that would trigger a violation for that monitor. So this monitor and appears to still be attaining the PM10 standard when looking at 2018 through 2020 totals as well, still less than 4. So no design days are chosen for this monitor either. Next slide. This is the first monitor that a design day will be chosen for. There were 3 low wind and 2 elevated winds for a total of 5 candidate design days in 2016 through 2018 at the Pinal County Housing Monitor. So this monitor will have a design day for. However, the good news is this monitor appears to be now attaining the standard based on 18 through 20 data. But because it did have those violations that existed in 2016 through 2018, a design day will be performed for this monitor. Next slide. This is the Stanfield Monitor. There were 6 low wind exceedance days and 12 elevated wind exceedance days in 16 through 18. So both a low wind and an elevated wind design day will be chosen for this monitor. The monitor has improved based on 2018 through 2020, but it does appear to still be violating the standard based on mainly elevated wind exceedances. Next slide. The last monitor is the Hidden Valley Monitor, the monitor with the most exceedances, 61 low wind exceedances, 21 elevated wind exceedances, and that trend has continued in the 2018 through 2020 totals. So design days will be selected for this monitor. Next slide. So in summary, based on the 2016 through 2018 data, 5 monitors are meeting the standard after removing high wind gust events: Casa Grande, Combs School, Coolidge, Eloy, and Maricopa. So no design days are recommended for these 5 monitors, and these monitors also continue to show attainment with 2018 through 2020 data. 3 monitors are violating the PM10 standard after high wind gust event exceedances are removed. That's Pinal County Housing, Stanfield, and Hidden Valley. So design day candidates for these 3 monitors are recommended. Next slide. So here are the design days that have been selected. In prior presentations, we went through some of the data showing how these design days would be selected, but in summary, the design days considered a variety of factors. How high the PM10 concentrations were, what were the meteorological conditions that led to the exceedances, what were the diurnal or hourly concentration patterns, what are the seasonal patterns of exceedance, and also what's the feasibility of modeling selected design days. Some design days have missing data, which makes their monitoring, modeling not good, because even though they're still in exceedance, there might be missing wind data or missing PM10 data for a few hours. So for the Pinal County Housing Monitor, only one design day was chosen. It was a low wind exceedance day. Because of the limited number of exceedances there and the continued attainment that is demonstrated in 2018 through 2020 data, it seems like only one design day was necessary, and this was the low wind design day of December 1st, 2017. And it had a 24-hour concentration of 185. For the Stanfield Monitor, one low wind day was selected and 2 elevated wind days. The low wind day is October 15th, 2017, and the 2 elevated wind days are August 28th, 2017 and July 6th, 2018. And I will explain a little bit more of these design days in particular in the following slides. And then for Hidden Valley Monitor, we had 2 low wind days selected, as there are 2 primary seasons when low wind exceedances occur, summer and fall. So we have the June day, June 7th, 2017, October 7th, 2017, and then 2 elevated wind days to help with modeling. And because Stanfield Monitor was also impacted on these days, the same days were chosen for Hidden Valley, August 28th, 2017, and July 6th, 2018. Next slide, please. So what are the modeling domains for these design days? So for low wind days, the modeling domains are established as a 4-mile radius around each of the monitoring sites. The reason why 4 miles was chosen for low wind days is when you look, a comparison was done of the exceedance days that occurred at the Hidden Valley Monitor and the Stanfield Monitor. These monitors are located approximately 4.4 miles apart. And when those exceedances were compared, it was found that Hidden Valley had 61 low wind exceedance days in that period, and there was only 1 day when Stanfield also exceeded on that day. So out of the 61 low wind Hidden Valley exceedance days, Stanfield only exceeded once on the same date. Also, on average, the Hidden Valley Monitor had 24-hour PM10 concentrations that were 104 micrograms higher than Stanfield Monitor on those 61 low wind days. This tells us that the sources that impact Hidden Valley on exceedance days are located within 4 miles of Hidden Valley. If they were located outside that 4-mile radius, you would expect Stanfield Monitor also to exceed on those days. Similarly, when you look at the 6 low wind exceedance days that occurred at Stanfield, again, there was only 1 day that Hidden Valley Monitor also exceeded on that day. On average, Stanfield Monitor had 24-hour PM10 concentrations that were 85 micrograms higher than the Hidden Valley Monitor on those 6 low wind days. So again, that tells us on low wind days, low wind exceedance days at Stanfield, it is the sources within 4 miles of Stanfield that exceed. If there were sources outside that 4-mile radius that caused the exceedances, you would also expect Hidden Valley to exceed on these days as well. So these 2 data points really confirm that 4 miles is a good modeling radius to determine when we're evaluating these exceedance days. So we're only going to look at emissions from sources within 4 miles of each of these monitors. Next slide, please. So here are the specific low wind domains. So the yellow is a 4-mile radius around Pinal County housing. So you can see some of the sources, predominantly agricultural fields, some open desert areas, and unpaved roads around Pinal County housing within the 4-mile domain. Next slide. This is the Stanfield low wind domain. A lot of agricultural fields, feedlots, unpaved roads are the primary sources within that 4-mile domain. Next slide, please. This is the Hidden Valley 4-mile domain, desert area to the southwest, otherwise agricultural areas, unpaved roads, feedlots, some vacant lots, some minor industrial activity. Those are the main sources within that 4-mile domain. Next slide. Okay, for elevated wind days, the modeling domain, we're going to start again with that same 4-mile radius as the basis. The reason for this is when the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality did the modeling, investigated the modeling for the 2015 modern area plan, they found that 80% of the wind-blown dust emissions on these elevated wind days came from sources within 6 miles of the monitor, or 6 kilometers of the monitor. 6 kilometers is 3.6 miles of the monitor. So we still want to focus on sources within 4 miles of the monitor, even on elevated wind days. Domains for the elevated wind days will be limited to the portion of the 4-mile wind domain that was directly impacted by wind. So the domain will be narrowed based upon the minimum and maximum wind directions observed under elevated wind hours. So this is when the wind speeds are 12 miles per hour or greater. The next slide shows these domains. Next slide, please. So here are the elevated wind domains for the Stanfield Monitor. The picture on the left is the August 28, 2017 domain. The red box is the high wind domain. That's the direction that the wind was coming from. So the wind was coming from the east and blowing to the west. So sources within that trajectory are the sources that would be creating the wind-blown dust. Similarly, on July 6, 2018, the similar wind pattern, although the wind directions were broader, so it's a wider domain than what is seen on August 28th. Next slide. And then similarly, here are the high wind domains for the Hidden Valley Monitor. The same 2 days, August 28th, and then July 6, 2018. Next slide, please. So now I want to go through each of these high wind days to give you some background information on them. And then we'll have a couple more slides, and then we'll be near the end of the presentation. So thank you for hanging in with all this information. So our first design day is December 1st, 2017. This is a low wind event. You can see the graph in the upper left-hand corner. The blue bars are the hourly PM10 concentrations. The yellow line is hourly average wind speed, and the red line is maximum wind speed gusts. So wind speeds were under 5 miles per hour the whole day for hourly average, and the maximum gust, I believe, was 10 miles per hour on this day. So these would be all considered, the high PM10 concentrations would all be considered from low wind activities. A draft emissions inventory for this specific day has been developed. Again, these are sources that are located within 4 miles of the Pinal County housing monitor. And that is in that table, the orange table. You can see some of the larger categories. Tilling and harvesting is about 7.7%. Paved road dust is 1.4%. Unpaved road dust is the largest category. Public roads at 16.8%. Private roads at 25.1%. Agricultural roads at 39.4%. And then on down the list, unpaved parking is 1.5% of the total. Construction is 2.8% of the total. And permitted sources are 4.3% of the total on this day. The bottom left-hand note box is just some highlights of the reasons why this day was selected compared to other candidate design days. Again, there was only 5 days available for the Pinal County Housing Monitor in 16 through 18. December 1st is the highest one of the low wind events, so that was chosen to be conservative. 2 of the 5 events were elevated wind events that looked like they were mainly monsoon events, even though the winds were below the 25 mile per hour threshold to officially qualify as a high wind gust event. They were just 1 hour spike that looked like to be a very localized monsoon and or thunderstorm activity. And then lastly, one of the other events was sort of unique and considered to be a long range transport event that is unlikely to occur. So that event was not chosen as well. Next slide. This is the Stanfield low wind design day. Again, you can see the higher concentrations are in the evening. This is pretty typical for the low wind days at Stanfield. Almost all of the exceedances had evening spikes under low wind conditions with hourly average wind speeds under 6 miles per hour. The inventory for this day within 4 miles of Stanfield is listed below or to the right in orange. Kind of a similar distribution of categories. Tilling and harvesting is 7.2%. Feedlots, 25% of the daily activity. Dairies are 3.3%. Unpaved roads, public is 9.5%. The agricultural roads is 41%. And then there are smaller contributions from other sources. Again, there were 6 low wind events to choose from in 16 through 18. One of these events was also the long range transport event talked about for Pinal County housing. One event had missing data, so that artificially inflated the 24-hour average, so that day was not selected. The other 4 events had concentrations that were pretty similar, 158 to 171. And of those 4 events, this October event had the most pronounced evening spike, which was why this event was chosen. Next slide, please. This is the first elevated wind event at Stanfield, August 28, 2017. Elevated wind events are caused by mainly 2 types of winds. Thunderstorm winds, which usually only last an hour or 2, and then the passing of frontal systems, which usually have between 3 to 10 hours of elevated PM10 concentrations due to the winds. This day is a thunderstorm day event. So you can see the hourly average wind speed was 18. The maximum gust was about 26 miles per hour. So this was a thunderstorm event, but it's not high enough to qualify as a exceptional event. And also only Stanfield and Hidden Valley exceeded on this day. The other monitors in the non-attainment area did not exceed. This day was chosen as the best day to represent a thunderstorm day out of the available elevated wind events. And also because Hidden Valley exceeded as well, this also prompted choosing this day because it looks like sources that are near each other, the windblown sources near Stanfield caused exceedances at Stanfield, and the windblown dust near Hidden Valley caused exceedances. So that was another reason to choose this date. The inventory is shown on the right. The new item you'll see at the bottom is windblown dust. So for this day, the windblown dust is 11% of the total day. And that is because we're only looking at windblown dust from 1 hour, whereas you still have those low wind activities that are occurring throughout the day. Next slide, please. This is a frontal system day, so there are much more elevated winds throughout the day, basically from about 8 a.m. through 2 p.m. or so. So there was not a good frontal system day available in 2017. So this is the only time that we deviated from choosing a 2017 day and chose a 2018 design day. Again, Hidden Valley also exceeded on this day, which also prompted choosing this day as a design day. Because the windblown gust occurred for a much longer period during this day, you can see that it's almost 47% of the total for the day versus the smaller percentage for the thunderstorm event day in the emissions inventory on the right. Next slide, please. These next 4 days are for Hidden Valley. So this first day is a June day for Hidden Valley. Again, the majority of low wind exceedances occur in summer and fall at Hidden Valley. And June is the month with the most summer low wind exceedances. So June 7th was chosen because it had both the typical morning and evening PM10 concentration spikes. If you look at the graph, June 7th is the dotted orange line on the graph, and the other days are the other low wind exceedance days that occurred in June 2017. So you can see the pattern is pretty similar. There is one large spike on June 15th. It's kind of out of the ordinary, but mostly you see a morning spike and then an evening spike as well. The emissions inventory for this, the draft emissions inventory for this design day is shown on the right. Tilling and harvesting for this day is about 1.8%. Feedlots are about 15%. Dairies are 3.3%. Again, unpaved roads are the largest category on these days, pretty evenly split between public, private, and agricultural roads, and then smaller contributions from less than 1% or 1.3% or less from the other sources. Next slide. Looking at the fall low wind exceedance days, again, October is the month with the most exceedances in the fall. One of the reasons October 7th was chosen is it has a pretty high concentration. It's the 5th highest concentration out of the 61 low wind events. So that helps show that the controls that are being committed to should control most exceedances, or if not all exceedances that occur, because we are choosing to model a high concentration day. And it's only 1 microgram below the EPA recommendation to look at the 4th highest day. Again, October 7th is noted as the dashed orange line in the graphic, and you can see the pattern is pretty similar to the other low wind exceedance days that occur in October 2017. The emissions inventory for this day is, again, in the table on the right. Tilling and harvesting activities are 3.6% of this day's inventory. Feedlots are 13.5%. Dairies are 3%. Again, unpaved road dust are the highest categories of 24%, 19%, and 33%, and then smaller contributions from the remaining categories. Next slide, please. This is the elevated wind event for August 28, 2017. Again, this is a thunderstorm event. So you see the thunderstorm impacting the hours of 7 and 8 p.m. predominantly. This day is also considered what we would consider a combination event because of the elevated morning conditions as well. So those morning conditions, also the high PM10 concentrations between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. also contributed to the site exceeding. In terms of the inventory on the right, some of the larger low wind sources, again, are the feedlots and the unpaved roads, and the windblown dust on this day is about 26% of the total inventory. Next slide. This is the last slide for the design days. This is the July 6th elevated wind event. So this is a thunderstorm wind event kind of beginning around 7 a.m. or so and lasting through 1, 2 p.m. This also is considered a combination event because of the high concentrations in the evening that would be from low wind sources. This is also the highest day that is being modeled. The PM10, 24-hour PM10 concentration on this day was 261. So this is the 4th highest day out of the 21 elevated high wind events, and it's also the 5th highest overall out of that 2016 through 2018 period after high wind dust events have been removed. So this is our highest concentration day. This day is dominated by windblown dust emissions at 75%, a little over 75% of the inventory, and then the low wind contributions from feedlots and unpaved roads are the other major categories of the day. All right, next slide, please. So MAG, as mentioned earlier, has contracted with Trinity Consultants to perform and assist in the air quality modeling to demonstrate attainment of the PM10 standard in the non-attainment area using these design days. Trinity is currently evaluating the use of the AirMod dispersion model to model the low wind events and low wind hours, and also looking at the use of proportional rollback to model the elevated wind events and the elevated wind hours. In terms of the attainment year, it looks like based upon the implementation schedule provided with the commitments from the Ag B&P Committee and the Pinal County Board of Supervisors, the earliest all of the BACM and MSN measures will fully be in place and implemented is in 2024. So under this schedule, 2026 may be the earliest year that attainment could be demonstrated. So this would allow for 3 complete years, 2024, 2025, 2026, of full implementation of all committed BACM and MSN measures. So that would allow for 0 to very limited exceedances to occur in 2024 through 2026 to demonstrate attainment of the standard. 2027 is also going to be evaluated because this is the latest extension year allowed by the Clean Air Act, should model attainment not be possible in 2026. You do have to choose the attainment year that is the most expeditious. So if attainment can be demonstrated in 2026, that is the year that must be chosen. If it cannot be demonstrated in 2026, the latest year would be 2027. Next slide, please. 2 more to go. In addition to attainment, we also have to show reasonable further progress and milestones. Again, Clean Air Act Section 172C2 requires the inclusion of reasonable further progress in all non-attainment area plans. RFP is defined as annual incremental reductions in emissions of the relevant air pollutant, which would be PM10, in this case, as required by this part or maybe reasonably required by the administrators for the purpose of ensuring attainment of the standard by the applicable date. RFP will be met by demonstrating incremental reductions in PM10 emissions from the 2000 base year until the attainment year, which will either be likely 2026 or 2027. So what we will likely be showing is we'll be showing a steady downward emissions trend starting with the base year in 2017 all the way to the attainment year, whether that be 2026 or 2027. In addition to showing that linear downward trend in emissions, Clean Air Act Section 189C, this is for serious PM10 non-attainment areas, also requires quantitative milestones, which are to be achieved every 3 years until the area is redesignated attainment and which demonstrate reasonable further progress. So the quantitative PM10 emission milestones that will likely be developed will be for years 2023 or 2024 or 2026/2027, depending on which attainment year is chosen. You may be asking why 2020 is in there. That's a year that has already been passed. So the controls, obviously, that are being adopted in this plan do not apply to 2020. So we're really looking at emission reductions in the years leading up to attainment. So we'll be looking at milestones in those years listed below. Last slide, please. Last thing I want to go over with the committee is the requirement that the plan needs to have contingency measures. Clean Air Act Section 172C9 requires that non-attainment area plans provide for the implementation of contingency measures if the administrator finds that the non-attainment area has failed to make reasonable further progress towards attainment or to attain the standard by the attainment date. Although there is no mandated emission reduction level for contingency measures, EPA recommends that contingency measures provide the emission reductions equivalent to 1 year's average increment of RFP. So again, what we're looking at here is you look at that linear line between 2017 and the attainment year, whether that be 2026 or 2027, and you want to see how much emission reductions do you get each year along that linear line. That gives you the amount that EPA recommends a contingency measure will reduce. Contingency measures must be above and beyond what is required to meet Vacant, MSM, and the demonstrate attainment. So all of the commitments that have been received from Ag BMP Committee and the Pinal Board of Supervisors, all of those commitments are needed to show Vacant, MSM, and the demonstrate attainment. So none of those commitments can be used as a contingency measure. Additionally, contingency measures due to a court ruling can no longer be implemented early and can only be implemented upon failure to make reasonable further progress or attain the standard by the attainment date. So they have to be measures that are sitting and waiting to be triggered should the area not attain the standard in 2026 or 2027, or if the area fails to make reasonable further progress when looking at the milestones. When triggered, these contingency measures must be implemented without further action by the state or EPA. Next slide, please. So that is a very long and detailed update on our plan, but we did want to go through this and give the committee all the information that we have to date. Now I'm available for any questions that the committee may have.
Does the committee have any questions for Mr. Poppin?
So you have written commitments from Pinal County as well as the State Agricultural Board. Have they identified any funding measures to be able to implement those commitments, or are we still awaiting those steps as well?
No, within the commitments, there are, they do mention how the funding will be, or the funds that they will be using to implement these measures. So the resolution and the exhibits to the resolutions do mention funding sources for their commitments. Whether those be existing funding sources or if additional funds are needed.
Are there any other questions? Okay, doesn't sound like it. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 6. We have Valley Metro 2021 Transportation Demand Management Survey results to be presented by Abigail Cooksey Williams of Valley Metro and Catherine DeBoer of West Group Research.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As you all know, the Commute Solutions program at Valley Metro receives support and funding through MAG. So each year we engage West Group to collect our data on the TDM program and see how we are doing. You may remember last year we shared our results with you, and we'd like to take just a few minutes today and share the most recent survey data outcomes with you. Kathy DeBoer from West Group will be presenting those findings for us today. Kathy?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Am I to share my screen, or is the presentation going to be? There it is. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Next slide. And one more. So as Abby mentioned, we do this study every year, and we have data going back to 1991. And West Group's had the pleasure of completing that survey virtually every year since then. We complete approximately 400 interviews every year with a plus or minus a margin of error of 5% at a 95% level of confidence. The sample is split to primarily gather the opinions of and behaviors of employed residents. And then we do bring in about 25% of them being non-employed commuters or residents, just so that we can understand their perceptions and their travel behaviors and awareness of commute solutions as well for them as unemployed residents. We split the sample, males and females. We conduct the survey using 2 methodologies, telephone and online surveys using a national panel. And it took us approximately 4 weeks between March 29 and April 26. And when we have comparable data, we pull in the historical data. Next slide, please. The last 2 years, obviously for everybody, has been upside down for us. And a lot of clients postponed or held off on doing survey research during the beginning stage of the pandemic. But as Abby and I talked, we just felt it was really important to continue the trend. We've never stopped the study for what has been going on in the world, and wanted to just make sure that we took the opportunity to continue to measure the effect of the pandemic on commute behavior, because we knew the potential was to have a tremendous impact. This slide just shows that as we talked to residents, we asked them in the last 2 years to not only talk about what their current employment status was, but also what their status was prior to March 1, 2020, of the beginning of the pandemic. And you can see that the black line shows that on average, we usually have around 50% being full-time employed, and another 7 or 8% being part-time employed, and that dropped dramatically in May of 20, and it rebounded in April of 21. When we compare the unemployed amounts, our 11% from 2020 and our 7% from April 21 matched the statistics for the area as well. So we felt confident that our sample was representative of the population in the Maricopa County region. Next slide. The opening question in the survey always asks about the major issues facing the Valley. And as you can well imagine, going back to 1991, we almost have a history lesson as we look at the ups and downs and the different topics that are top of mind. Not surprisingly, last year, COVID and unemployment were really dominating people's top of mind. And you can see in 2021, while they still were at the top of the list, people are starting to think of what we call more normal issues facing the Valley, including air quality, transportation, and growth. Next slide. If we just look at the air quality, transportation, and growth, you can see that we did have increases in talking about issues facing public transit, and also increased concern over traffic congestion, both increased over 2020 when there was very little concern or very little mention of either one of those. Next slide, please. We also ask perceptions of the Valley's traffic congestion. We ask them to look at the Valley as a whole, as well as their personal congestion that they encounter on their daily commute. And you can see that while we had a decline in congestion perceptions for 2020, it rebounded this year to back up to about 90%, consistent with what we've seen in the past. Whereas for personal, we had a bump in 2018 or 2019 up to 58%, saying it was a bigger moderate problem, and we dropped off in 2020 and we stayed low. So folks are not experiencing as much congestion personally, even though they feel that they're seeing it out there on the road in general. Air quality, residents were seeing some improvement in air quality in 2019, and again, another drop in 2020, but they feel that they're seeing a bigger problem resurfacing again in 2021. Next slide, please. The other impact that we found from COVID was just a decline in advertising recall, and this is not unique just to Valley Metro. If you think back to the fall of 2020 and try to recall any advertising that you saw in the fall of 2020, it was dominated excessively by the campaign. And so obviously that mars or covers up any other advertising that may have been out there. And then people's lives were upside down during the pandemic, and their concerns and what's important to them tend to be things that aren't related to commute solutions, because so many of them are out of work or working from home. And so advertising about trying mass transit or finding ways to stay at home just weren't things that they're going to pay attention to. But we did notice that people still think there's value in encouraging people to use alternate modes. It's down slightly, but it still maintains at the high 70s that we've seen historically. The one plus sign that we saw is that the online advertising that encouraged drivers to visit the sharethерide.com, that is the top bar there, that we had an increase in specific ad read calls. So it follows that, you know, more people were online and doing things online perhaps more than they had been historically, but those advertisements were having an impact and people were noticing them. Next slide, please. So the shift, as we all heard and are aware personally, in commute mode, if you look at prior to March, this is self-reported, prior to March 1, 2020, from the residents interviewed this year, 55% said they drove alone or at least one day a week, whereas 67%, 45% were using an alternate mode. So compared to this year, only 33% indicated that they were using some sort of drive alone, and 67% were using some mode of alternate mode. So tremendous shifts from previous to 2020 and 2021. And we honestly expected that there might be a little more rolling back of the dependence and usage of alternate modes from 2020 to 2021. But as you can see, everything stayed pretty consistent with these numbers. Next slide, please. This just breaks it out a little bit more. We look at this, the shift to commute by percent of people and by percent of trips. So this is the percent of people who are reporting using a single occupant vehicle or an alternate mode. And again, you can see that the alternate modes that were being used did not include much in terms of carpool, van pool, bike, bus, Lyft. Walk has held steady over the course of the years. Telework is the one that jumped up the most, from a normal around 15 to 20% usage, jumping all the way up to almost half the population reporting to telework. And then schedules has stayed consistent or risen slightly. And I've been hearing various musings in the news and other articles saying that employers, as they go back to work, are looking at the option of offering compressed schedules as a way to alternate people in their offices and trying to keep the number of people in the offices down, but you're still managing to get the work completed, and compressed schedules. We may see an impact on that as time goes by. Next slide, please. This is just a fun slide to show that goes all the way back to 1993, showing that the really big shift in the always AMU, that darker blue line, jumping from a range of usually between 11 to 15% and really not a lot much variability over the 20 years, but suddenly jumping to the high 40s, the folks that are always using alternate mode. And as we saw from the previous slides, that is really the people working from home. Next slide, please. When we look at it by percentage of trips, so in other words, we count all of the trips that are made or not made when they're telecommuting. And then we look at those specifically, and we can see that 43% of all trips were made using a single occupant vehicle, compared to 57% that can be attributed either as not made or made by an alternate mode, such as carpool, van pool, bike, bus, walking, and light rail. But again, the bulk of that is coming from the non-work or the non-trips that are made either through teleworking by staying home, or the compressed work schedule by where folks don't make a trip 1 or 2 days a week. Next slide. This is just showing that when we look at large versus small organizations, the large that are affected by the reduction plan, and that need to have plans in place with their travel coordinators to lower their amount of trips, that the large organizations are more likely to be able to keep their employees at home and minimize their use of SOV in this year, whereas smaller organizations, not surprisingly, have a harder time being able to meet those obligations and to allow people to work from home. But still, the alternate mode total is at the high 50%, compared to a 30 to 40% of those organizations in the past. Next slide. The top two reasons, as they were last year, the COVID is leaving people to use their alternate mode or stay at home, and their company is set up in such a way that that's the way that they want their employees to be working. And you can see that the one that dropped completely is the convenience factor. So convenience was not a motivating factor for the change in alternate mode use, that it really is related to the company dictating that they stay at home pre-COVID. Next slide, please. Not surprisingly, we asked folks about their first aware of online matching, and that number actually has not shifted. The likelihood to use the online matching system, not surprisingly, dropped in 2020, but we did see it come back to indicate that some people are starting to look outside of their maybe their COVID bubble and expanding it to people that they work with to find a commute solution now that more and more people are being asked to return to the office. Next slide, please. Just looking at their employer involvement, you get more employer involvement at the larger companies than the smaller companies. Again, that is to be expected, with 53% of larger employers employing alternate mode resources compared to only 15% of small, and 43% of larger employers encouraging alternate mode usage compared to only 8% of small. Next slide, please. And incentives, no changes here. That is what employees look for the most, is that their employers to offer them some type of incentive to use an alternate mode, and that makes it more palatable and more interesting to consider. Next slide, please. The most common information is the carpool information and carpool matching, so that it explains the interest in the carpool matching service as well. There is still interest in learning more about total transit. That is starting to resurface a little bit this year as things return somewhat to normal. Next slide, please. We've asked these number of questions about which message would most likely encourage them to use an alternate mode. And prior to this year, for the most part, it's really been, the sample is divided fairly evenly among all of the different samples, and not a variability from year to year. But this year you can see that the saving money, improving the environment, and helping reduce air pollution resonated more strongly with residents than it has in the past. And things such as reducing stress and traffic congestion by using public transit, all of those things kind of slid back down the list a little bit as people work at home. As we mentioned, they're experiencing traffic congestion. They're not really looking to public transit at this point as an option, and they are less concerned about saving time and being stressed, again, because a lot of them are not commuting at all to work. But you can also see that 2 in 5 really want to understand that Valley Metro is keeping their passengers safe on public transit, and that's an important component for them to even consider moving on to public transit in the future. Next slide. So I've covered most of these conclusions as we've gone through, but just to reiterate, the pandemic continued to have a significant impact on the results, not only on commute mode usage, but also on the advertising and messaging. So at this point, next year, we will return to more normal surveying. We will now just be looking at these last 2 years kind of as our new baseline for the study, and we will just continue now to see how life moves on or doesn't move on as the pandemic influences and hopefully the influence diminishes. The 2021 data did show that there is some recovery going on. There's more top of mind concern for more typical topics, and traffic congestion is starting to rise again as an issue that folks are concerned about. Next slide, please. Telecommuting continues to dominate, and based on what we are hearing, it is definitely going to be a solution that more and more employers use. A lot of employers were balking and pushing back against it because of all the requirements and setup that it took, but now that they've got it in place, and employees are being much more picky about the types of jobs that they take, we expect that where there may be some sliding on the telecommuting numbers, that this is going to be much more of a dominant non-trip mode of collecting or of getting to work. Carpooling and van pooling, not surprisingly, are underutilized, but seeing increased interest is encouraging, and hopefully that that can be executed and folks can begin to see that as a safe alternative for commuting to work. The impact of the pandemic and the national elections on awareness were not unexpected, so I think we expect that awareness of advertising for the coming year will be stronger, but it is encouraging that the Share of the Ride campaign online was very strong, and that continues to be a good way to promote the message to use alternate modes. Next slide. And top of 2020, the top 2 motivators to consider other modes were saving money and saving the environment. As we mentioned, people were able to see the changes. I mean, we actually could see less air pollution last year because there was less traffic congestion. And I think it really brought the message home that there still can be a difference that we can make by using alternate modes and staying at home. And then employed residents are looking for incentives typically, and that could be used possibly to motivate the use of more of the carpooling options and perhaps transit as we move forward in the field of those options are safer. And that concludes the presentation. If there's any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Does the committee have any questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any. Thank you. I learned a lot from your presentation. It was interesting results there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on now to agenda item number 7. That's the request for future agenda items. So are there any requests by the membership for an item on a future agenda? Okay, hearing none. Business is now concluded. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn the meeting. Martin Lucido, City of Surprise.
Thank you, Martin. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us and have a great afternoon.